Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by John Rossant, founder and CEO of CoMotion and advisory board member NEOM. John, thanks so much for joining us from Saudi Arabia today. How are things over there?
Well, it's kind of hot, number one, but things are good. You know, it's a fascinating country at a very fascinating time. The government unveiled these very exciting new plans for NEOM, which is a completely new city that's going up in the northwest of the country, not very far from Egypt and Israel, by the way. And it's sort of a radical new approach to living in cities that I think is adapted to the 21st century and beyond.
To put it in context for our listeners, NEOM's roughly the size of Massachusetts. Why is it being transformed in the city of tomorrow? Because when you think of the city of tomorrow, the first thing that comes into most people's minds is Walt Disney's version of Epcot, but you can call this Epcot on steroids for what the Crown Prince is envisioning.
Yeah, it's Epcot on steroids, I think, and then some. I mean, I think it solves for several challenges. You know, one is it's a rapidly expanding population. It's become, in some ways, the center of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. So they need urban space. So there's a choice. If you could continue massive urban sprawl like you have in the existing cities like Riyadh and Jeddah and others. And that would be catastrophic for the environment, for traffic, for all sorts of things. Or you could come up with a new approach. And then the new approach is verticality. Really having a city in the future, the size of London, for example, in a geographic space that a footprint that maybe is 5% of what London is. So NEOM indeed is the size of Massachusetts or Belgium. It's a virtually pristine natural area. It's like the Wild West. You have maybe 20,000 people who live there in this vast zone. So it preserves 95% of nature as complete nature, and it builds on only 5% of the land area. It's also a choice. All transportation will be zero emission, very heavy use of autonomous vehicles, advanced air mobility options to go around the place. The thing that they are not doing is building freeways and highways. I mean, there's no new road construction except the construction necessary to build the place. And so I was going around the little town that's been built where there are about 2,000, 3,000 people already living there, sort of executives, workers, etc. Completely, I've never seen so many Teslas in my life. And great new sort of Mercedes electric vehicles sort of ported directly from Germany. There's not a single internal combustion engine car. Autonomous vans going around the little city, bike lanes, heavy use of bikes and scooters. So it's sort of like a dream city for an urbanist like me who thinks about the future of mobility.
With 95% of the natural area preserved, I've had the pleasure of swimming in the Red Sea off the coast of Egypt, and it's gorgeous. And I describe it to my daughters when you go in the Red Sea. It's an episode of Finding Nemo with the fish. Will the residents of NEOM be able to interact with the Red Sea?
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is on the Saudi side of the Red Sea, which is NEOM, the coral reefs are completely untouched. I mean, they are among the most beautiful coral reefs in the world. With me on the NEOM advisory board, for example, is Alexandra Cousteau, who's the granddaughter of Captain Cousteau. And she herself is one of the great champions of saving marine life, etc. And she says the coral reefs there are unequaled in the world. And she's right. So yes, people will be able to snorkel and dive in ways that do not damage the environment. And, on the Egyptian side of the Red Sea, the coral reefs have really suffered. it's quite tragic there.
Is sustainability at the core of NEOM? So you mentioned it's emission-free, 95% preserved. Is that the key core of NEOM?
Absolutely. What's interesting is they're not only talking the talk, they really are walking the walk. As you know, the Saudis have made fairly massive investment bets on Lucid, Joby, the eVTOLs. There's a partnership with Volocopter, German eVTOL manufacturer NEOM. So they're anticipating many of these technologies. The other thing about NEOM, it's a very big bet on hydrogen. And so the core energy of NEOM is hydrogen. And what you have is this extraordinary combination of very, very intense solar radiation during the day and rather high winds at night along the Red Sea. The combination of wind power and solar power during the day, you have virtually unlimited amounts of cheap, if not free, electricity. And so that can power sort of massive electrolysis to produce renewable hydrogen. And so it's very much, in some ways, it's the first hydrogen-based economy on Earth. And I think what's so interesting is that Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil and gas exporter. It's an economy that's built on oil, obviously. But this is a bet on the future that doesn't involve hydrocarbon. It's a very important statement. I think we're going to see more of this, by the way, because you mentioned Sharm el-Sheikh, Grayson, and as you may know, in next November, there's the UN climate change talks, COP27, are taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh. And then next year, COP28, they're taking place in the Gulf, in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And I think what you will see is a huge pivot by the big oil-based economies in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, towards renewable energy. I think people don't really understand that yet, but I think it's coming, and I think it's going to be hugely significant. Look, these people understand that the oil age is ending. They're acting on it right now.
Take Saudi Aramco, one of the world's largest corporations globally. Will they export renewable energy then?
Yes. In fact, Saudi Aramco has been investing in hydrogen. They have a lot of programs. It's quite quiet. They've stepped up investing in companies that are in the renewable space. So I think we're going to see that a lot. There's no doubt the Saudis are thinking big. There's press releases this week that there's a project called the Mirror Line. It's going to run 75 miles long, 1,600-foot skyscraper connected by a high-speed train. You look at this and it reminds me of the Bruce Willis movie. It's like, whoa, okay, this is really kind of building the future. What was the rationale behind that ambitious development? Well, the Mirror Line, as it's now called, is the heart of NEOM. So that's really where the bulk of urban population of NEOM will live in the coming years. It's going to take decades to build. It's not something you can really fast track. There's the non-trivial question of attracting millions of people to move to the northwest quadrant of Saudi Arabia, which is in the millions. That's a sort of generational change, I think. You can't do that quickly. But it's modular. So you have these modules of the line. They're about half a mile each, where you'll have populations of 80,000. So I think the plan is to build 5 of these by 2030. It's massive. For example, just to give you an idea, they're now about 30,000 workers, I think, there. By 2024, 25, they're talking about 450,000 workers working on the line. So it's something that's a scale that I think we haven't seen before in human history. Not even the Hoover Dam or like the Three Gorges Dam project in China. This is really big. I think the world does need a radical experiment like this. We cannot continue urbanizing as we have been. We're ruining the planet. And so if we could think of a way to do this in a sustainable way, using renewable energy, that can be pretty interesting. That certainly solves for problems of a planet where desertification is more and more widespread, where there's water scarcity, etc., global warming. So I think this is a response to that. And it's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. It's a very big bet.
From a climate perspective, it's very, very hot in Saudi Arabia, very windy at certain times. How will the building be designed to incorporate into the climate to reduce the heating and cooling needs of the residents?
As far as I understand, what's interesting is about the line, it's essentially these two structures that are continuous. It's like a wall that bisects the whole territory. It's 200 meters wide. It's about a quarter mile, something like that. So you have, that's the width, and then it goes on for about 100 and something miles. So it's a wall, and it's, in some places, it's higher than the Empire State Building. It looked at from the outside, it looks like a mirror. And the idea of having a mirrored surface is that you will see nature reflected back on you. So it kind of disappear into visually. But when you're inside, it's a sort of vibrant city, at least that's the idea, that is in a kind of enclosed space. It's open at the top. You know, it's unclear to me how, I mean, sort of the sort of air conditioning, I think that's sort of, there are all sorts of challenges that they're going to have to figure out. But they have some of the best minds in the world working on this. We'll see. It's a massive experiment, but a very, very serious one.
The reflection concept has been tried many times by architects. Norman Foster has tried it. Frank Gehry very famously with the Disney Hall wanted to be reflective, to reflect the culture of LA. I'd like to see it done because it's something that can have a really positive impact if an architect can actually make that vision come through. Do you think that it's something that we will eventually see by 2030 become a reality?
There are issues. You know, for example, you have this massive mirrored wall extending for 100 miles across the landscape, roughly east-west. You know, what does that do to sort of migratory bird wind? There are issues that need to be resolved. I think we're going to see some of it built for sure. I think there's still technological challenges that will really have to be worked out. You had really some of the greatest architects in the world who are working on pieces of the line. I've seen some of the plans. I mean, they're really dramatic. Unclear what the end product will actually look like. But I have seen structures actually in Saudi Arabia that have mirrored surfaces, and they're in the desert, and they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. They kind of disappear. It's hard to kind of describe it, but there's a massive conference center and concert hall in northwest Saudi Arabia, in the desert, in a place called El Ula, which is a whole oasis that's been kind of opened up to tourism. And it's, I think, the Crown Prince, who's the visionary guy behind this whole project, I think took his cue from this structure that built a couple of years ago. It is gorgeous, absolutely beautiful.
For our listeners who are wondering what a mirror house might look at in the desert, do a quick Google search on Desert X Palm Springs. There was a mirrored house. I was there many years ago, and you could see it, what John's describing. It's really neat how it just blends there right into the desert landscape. John, so NEOM is a development. It's booming. Another city with massive booming development that you're deeply entrenched in with CoMotion is Miami. The city's emerged as a crypto hub. You've hosted several Miami CoMotions there for years. I'm getting a little nervous about the current state of Miami's economy just because it's becoming a one-trick pony again. What are your thoughts on the current state of the Miami economy?
Well, I would push back on that a little bit. I don't think it is a one-trick pony. And I think the history of Miami has been one of booms and busts, probably more than any other city in the United States, except perhaps Las Vegas. I think this time it is a bit different. It feels different. You know, I've had lots of discussions on this subject with Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, who's a big crypto fan, as you know, as everybody knows. But I think crypto is only part of it. I mean, yes, Coinbase has moved there. A lot of the crypto cowboys have moved there. And it's probably the center of crypto in the United States. And crypto has collapsed for the time being. I think it's going to come back. I think Web3 is going to come back. It's you know, I absolutely believe, and you know, I don't own crypto, so I'm not shilling for crypto at all. But I think there are a lot of similarities to the early boom and bust era of the internet, where, you had all this froth, and then 2001, it all collapsed and everybody said, and then it roared back. I think that's going to happen in some ways with decentralized finance and Web3 applications. I feel I don't get it. I'm too old, but my kids are really into it. And I think it's here to stay. But that's not really what Miami is ultimately about. I think Miami, it's a much, much, much bigger story than just crypto. If you look, for example, at the end of the sort of Chinese-American kind of economic cooperation, and it's certainly a Cold War that is not going to be resolved for a long, long time. So I think you're going to have a lot of more inward investment, more manufacturing that's going to take place closer to home, a lot of agriculture that's going to happen closer to home. So I think that means that's good for Central America. It's good for Latin America, I believe. I think Miami will benefit from this. I think Miami also benefits from the Floridian light government regulation, light but intelligent, I would say. You know all about that, Grayson, the way the state has embraced approaches autonomous mobility in a very smart way, but it's a light way. It's not heavily regulated, but it's intelligently regulated. And I think the low tax environment, of course, is interesting in Florida for a lot of people. It's a young city. I'm still very, very, very bullish on Miami. There's a vibrancy there that you don't see in San Francisco and Los Angeles and Chicago, or even in New York. And I don't think it has anything to do with crypto, frankly. I'm not bearish. I think it's going to be a somewhat difficult time for everyone. The era of sort of free money's over. There's going to be fiscal tightening. Interest rates are going up. So that's going to impact everybody, not only Floridians. But I think on the whole, I'm definitely bullish. Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm bullish on Miami. I'm optimistically cautious is how I would just describe Miami. So one aspect, I'm very bullish. You have Citadel, Ken Griffin moving the global headquarters to Miami. You have a lot of the New York hedge funds going there.
Yeah. Wow. What a move. What a statement. Yeah, of course.
It's a big statement. So let's say Citadel's going to support 1,000 jobs, and what Ken Griffin has done in Chicago from a endowment perspective to the charter schools, to the arts, he's done a lot of really good. He's going to do more good in Miami, but I'm concerned about, you mentioned fiscal tightening. We're in a housing bubble. The price of Miami housing is going to collapse. A lot of that was bought on margin loans from crypto. And I want to put this into perspective. The price of Bitcoin is currently trading at $21,826 per coin as of July 25th. It's down over 54% year to date. And then you have Miami Coin, which Mayor Suarez championed as a solution to reduce income inequality. That's down 84%. And as Axios describes, it's nearly worthless. It's absolutely worthless. So if we have an economic downturn, down 54%, that triggers a lot of margin calls. Then you have forced selling in the real estate to cover the margin call. Puts in perspective, look at what happened to Three Arrows Capital. Look what happened to all these over-leveraged crypto startups. That's eventually going to trickle down. That concerns me until we get enough, if you want to call it traditional finance in Miami, it's going to be a rough patch.
Yeah, but look, for every crypto firm, you have 4 or 5 private equity firms that have moved down to Miami. Come on. And I think you have really an interesting venture ecosystem that's growing day by day in South Florida. I mean, there are a lot of interesting startups. You have my friend Dan Kleiman, who is right at the heart of the blue tech economy, which is a lot of the kind of innovation that's happening around the sea and the oceans and sustainability, et cetera. And that's booming. Miami's going to be the center of that. I think in mobility in general terms, by the way, I think the next big wave that we're going to see, the trend, is decarbonizing maritime transportation. And Florida is a global hub of that. It's certainly a global hub for pleasure boats. And kind of consumer level, it's the world capital of the cruising industry. I think that's going to have to be decarbonized. So there's going to be a lot of interesting action there. No, I would not diminish that at all.
Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. You and I both have the pleasure of knowing him, Mayor Gimenez, who's now Congressman Gimenez. incredible gentleman with great leadership skills, and he's constantly showed manufacturing. He always wanted to get those. What can Miami do to start to generate those manufacturing jobs?
Ooh, that's a good question because there is not a strong manufacturing tradition in Florida. However, manufacturing is evolving at the speed of light. And so, as you know well, since you're like me, a mobility specialist in many ways, the car of today doesn't necessarily have to be built in a $2 billion car factory that has a sort of massive footprint. You could have much, much smaller runs and very profitable. And so I think it will be highly automated. You have 3D printing, all sorts of things that go into making a car or a vehicle. So there's no reason that can't happen in Florida. So I think we're going to see that. I think it's probably not we'll see it sort of move out of the traditional centers like Detroit, et cetera. And we've been seeing that over the last few decades anyway with, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, et cetera. So the problem with Florida is that it's, Miami, South Florida, it's costly. Land is expensive, labor is expensive, more and more expensive. I see the future of Florida is much more of a service economy than a manufacturing economy. So I probably wouldn't agree with Jimenez on that.
The large part of Florida's economy, I don't know the number off the top of my head, is service. And a lot of the individuals that started in the hospitality industry, they learn a lot of skills, and those are transferable. Some of them go into the cruise ship industry. Some go into the corporate environment. And you mentioned Miami is the cruise ship capital of the world. If you've been to Miami, there's cruise ships everywhere. And you and I have talked a lot about offline about decarbing maritime. I'm a big fan of that concept. Let's just take a large cruise ship, say 300 passenger, 400 passenger. Is it technically feasibly possible today to run that on green hydrogen?
No, it's not. You're going to be running on fuel cells, which is the kind of propulsion system for hydrogen, or tenders and things like that. So that's happening today. So I think because those are easy to decarbonize. Hydrogen fuel cells will not power big ships. However, you will have things like e-methanol, other kinds of potentially green ammonia, other kinds of fuels that are renewable, that will more and more and sustainable, that will more and more power these ships. These technologies are still coming on stream, but there's certainly an imperative now to do it. I think if a Royal Caribbean or a Norwegian sort of cracks the code of having cruise ships, run on green power, whatever that green power is, I'll go on a cruise on that. Like that'll be a great sort of marketing ploy. I mean, people respond to that now. People are concerned about the environment. There's no question about it. Look at the summer we're having, for God's sake. What that implies. I mean, right now, 115 degrees in Seattle. I mean, hello. This is serious stuff, and I think people really are starting to understand that.
You look at decarbing maritime. In the Akagon region of NEOM, there's a development which will be the largest floating structure in the world. It's a fully automated port complete with autonomous transport systems. What is the vision and how will it be done to decarbonize maritime there?
I don't know even where to start. I mean, there's a lot of work going on electric maritime mobility, so electric boats. I think that will be the way you get around. There's many, many islands off NEOM, by the way, in the Red Sea. And I think one of the big, big stories is that in time, I think the Red Sea will become the new Mediterranean in terms of kind of yachting, paradise, boating, etc. It's staggeringly beautiful. There are hundreds of islands that are untouched. So the fact that it's only being developed now means that you could do it you can build in sustainability for the future. We're going to see hydrogen boats, electric boats, things like that, connecting all of these islands. There will be restrictions on using diesel and bunker fuel and things like that. You will not be able to anchor in NEOM if you have a boat that runs on that. Infrastructure is really important. You can't have renewable energy vehicles that are powered by renewable energy, whether they're boats or trucks or cars. You don't have the infrastructure. So what they're building now is the infrastructure. There is no infrastructure. So it's in a way less costly to do it this way because you're starting from scratch.
How do you know what infrastructure to put in when you start from scratch?
They've made a big bet on renewable hydrogen. There's already, I think, a $5 or $6 billion plan to build a green hydrogen plant there. In fact, I saw it going up today when I helicoptered over the area. There's a big bet on hydrogen, big bet on electric because they're producing so much virtually free electricity up there. And by the way, it's far from the Persian Gulf. I mean, there is no oil in that part of Saudi Arabia. Even if they wanted to go with oil and gas, you'd have to pipe it in, etc. So
we mentioned this earlier. The Red Sea is known as a world-renowned dive spot, as you mentioned, Ms. Cousteau. Will we get to the point where NEOM will have autonomous boats so a tourist or an individual visiting NEOM can hop on an autonomous boat, go to a world-renowned dive spot, dive, get back in the autonomous boat, and go back to the land?
I personally think that autonomous boating is something we're not going to see for a while. I think the whole docking, things like that, you need someone there. I think where autonomy and shipping will be big. I think that's where you will have sort of massive tankers. I think they're already virtually autonomous. I think that's going to increase when they're on the high seas, et cetera. And sort of some docking operations will be robotized. But I think you're going to need people to pilot these, when you go to a little island, et cetera. I don't see those being autonomous for a long time.
It'd be interesting.
Do you?
I think at some point, yes.
Yeah.
Because the most dangerous aspect of boating is docking and docking. If you can figure out a way to, you mentioned infrastructure, design infrastructure from the ground up that is built for an autonomous boat that has a dedicated docking lane, that's fascinating. Trying to retrofit a dock, not so sure, but if you're going to build it from the ground up with the infrastructure in mind, yes, I think it's something that you can accomplish. And I think it would increase the safety.
Interesting. Yeah.
And the experience.
Yeah. Interesting. Actually, it's something I don't know a lot about. I don't know who's working in that field. I imagine people are looking at it.
The one thing that you and I both know, and a lot of our listeners know, the Middle East is emerging as a hub for all things autonomy. Cruise is now actively mapping Dubai for a 2023 deployment of the Cruise Origin. Go Team Cruise on that. You mentioned NEOM's building infrastructure from the ground up. Dubai is preparing to launch the Cruise Origins. How should Dubai prepare to integrate the Cruise Origins into their transportation ecosystem?
Dubai is a big city. It's dense. But it's not so dense that autonomous delivery doesn't make sense. I think it's a really, really smart move by Cruise to move into Dubai. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to take off. The other thing about the Middle East is it skews very, very young. The average age in Saudi Arabia or Dubai or, in the Middle East in general is sort of mid-20s, low to mid-20s. So it's probably not quite half the median age in the United States. And you feel it. There's just a lot of young people with smartphones, incredibly digitally aware, digitally agile, in ways that we just don't appreciate at all. So I think you're going to see a receptivity to autonomy, to new modes of mobility, new modes of commerce. They're going to leapfrog us in many, many ways, I believe. And I see it already here. It's the highest per capita use of social media, Twitter, e-commerce. It is really happening here in ways that go way beyond what we're seeing in the United States or Europe or other developed markets.
One thing I think a lot about is public perception for the younger individuals living in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, for a matter of fact. What are their general thoughts on autonomy and autonomous vehicles being a digital-first younger culture? Are they openly and welcoming to this technology, in your opinion?
Yes, I think they will be. For example, just getting around Jeddah the last few days, I've been using Uber. They're all driven by sort of young Saudis who are kind of making, want to make a little extra money. I think autonomy is going to happen pretty big here. The Saudis have been investing heavily in it over the years, as you know. So, no, I think we're going to see it roll out here probably earlier than in many, many, many other places. And you already have autonomous shuttles. I saw them operating today up in NEOM, for example. And it's not a vanity thing. It's not to show off. They're actually used.
Autonomous shuttles are running at NEOM today, but overall, how is NEOM preparing for a future with autonomous vehicles? Will they be shuttles? Will they be hybrids where you have some passenger, some delivery? What is that vision for NEOM?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, as I understand it, if you choose to live in NEOM in a couple of years, you probably will not own your car. You almost definitely will not own your own car. If you owned your car, it will have to be an electric vehicle or a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. But what you will do is you will pay something, $200, $300 a month. Either you will pay it, your employer will pay it, or it will be paid for you, which will give you access to mobility on demand. So if you have to get to the airport, you have an app and an autonomous vehicle shows up, takes you to the airport. And that's how it's going to work. It will very, very, very high degree of autonomous services throughout. And that extends to eVTOLs, of course. And I think this will be one of the big early test cases, in terms of geographies that open up to advanced air mobility options. Those will be largely autonomous.
On-demand mobility is the future because it comes down to one simple thing that everybody wants: convenience. That's what everybody wants, is convenience. And I started doing some research around on-demand mobility, just looking at different numbers. And you mentioned a city without cars, a very famous city we all love, near and dear to our hearts, New York City. Not a lot of individuals there own cars. Individuals that live their whole lives, they ride the subway. So I start looking into the MTA data. I want to get your opinion on this. There was an interview the other day with a senior MTA official in Bloomberg, which is the largest mass transit provider. And they stated that they may not get to 100% of pre-pandemic ridership until 2035. Further putting this in perspective, 74% of 2019 rider levels will not be hit until 2024, down from a prior forecast of 86%. Are the days of mass transit coming to an end, partially from the convenience factor, but also the pandemic? And I don't mean to poke at this, but the rising crime issues that New York is facing?
Yeah, I think, look, all of the above. I mean, I think clearly what's had an impact is working from home. I think just people, choosing to spend Thursday, Friday working at home. That is not going to change, I think. I think that seems to me there's a real permanent shift in how and when and where we work. That's number one. I think there's a serious problem that I hope is temporary, which involves security. And we see this particularly at MTA in New York, some other places. We have to get a grip on that, clearly. I think that mass transit, public transportation, has to be made fun and seamless. It's complicated. You go into New York subway, it's sweaty, it's dirty. In Los Angeles, I'm a big fan of the LA Metro, and it's expanding. It's a big expansion plan, as you know. But LA Metro stations, there are no bathrooms. There's nowhere to buy a soda. There's nowhere to buy a paper. Well, people don't read newspapers anymore. There's nowhere to buy a candy bar. They're sterile. Make it a compelling experience. Have concerts down there. Make it fun. Bring commerce in. One of the reasons why mass transit and public transportation is so developed and sophisticated in Asia, in Japan, in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, is that they're commerce centers. Stations are malls, and they're fun. They're interesting. You can go watch a movie. They're clean. And so I think we have to have a revolution. And transit is here to stay. I'm a big believer in public transit. I grew up in Manhattan. I love the subway. It's not for every city, but I think it should be expanded. And I think if you make it a kind of compelling choice, it will come back. It will come back. Perhaps not. I don't think we're going to come back to these sort of mass rush hours in the morning, rush hours in the evening, people heading to the suburbs into the dense urban core, downtown business district to work. I mean, that sort of model is probably permanently over, but it's not completely over. We still need transit. It's a key part. Transit is part of the multimodal future of a city. So I think successful cities in the future will succeed in making multimodality seamless, efficient, economical, so that you don't have to think about, you get on a shared bike, you go to a metro station, you hop on the metro, you maybe have to then get into a ride hailing service to go to your office, whatever. It should be a seamless journey. You don't even think about it. And I think that's what we have to get to. We're all striving for that in some ways, to make multimodality successful. So transit will always be with us, but there are going to be other modes of transportation in the city. The secret is how they fit together in a smart and efficient way.
And the glue for that is the payment. You can't take out your credit card 5 different times. It's inconvenient, and the stops. Nobody wants to stop. It's this always on-demand economy, and you can partially look at Amazon. You want it? I get it on demand. You look at DoorDash. I want it? I get it on demand. And that's the same thing that consumers want with mobility. That's why I'm very bearish on transit.
Well, look, I mean, I think transit as a spine is a smart idea. I think that will be with us for hundreds of years, but it won't be the only means of getting around a city like New York, for example. But also, payment is not the only way it will be seamless. I mean, the seamlessness also derives from smart infrastructure, rejiggering infrastructure. So, for example, in Los Angeles, there is a great startup called Envoy Technologies that does mobility as an amenity. So what they do is they go to property developers, the apartment building, for example, and say, so instead of people having their own parking and their own cars, et cetera, that's the past. They say to the developer, look, we'll put in and we'll manage a fleet of electric cars for your building. So Grayson Brulte, you rent or you own an apartment in that building, you will have 50 hours a month or a week or whatever of access to electric cars in the shared electric cars in the garage. That to me is the future. So it's also, that's a kind of infrastructural choice. You're going to have to rejigger. There'll be less individual parking, et cetera. But there'll be other kinds of ways to get around.
Bundled mobility. It's a topic I think a lot about. It's fascinating. If you're going to spend, say, $4,000, $5,000 a month for a condo, and you can get X amount of hours in a BMW i3 or say a Tesla Model 3, for example, that's fascinating, because if you start running the economic numbers, you're not reliable for the supply chain to get the vehicle, so you're already ahead there. You do not have to cover the insurance payment. You do not have to cover the charging payment, and you don't have to cover the lease payment of the vehicle. You pay your landlord or the management company one check. That's a fascinating business. If you look at bundling, or you look at Asia, they like the bundled apps. It's kind of with the apartments or condos, it's the bundled experience where I want to live in this building because I get X, Y, and Z experiences. If I'm the owner of that building, I'm just racking up larger profit margin, and not on the backside, I'm creating stickiness to keep you there.
Right, exactly. And I don't have to put in those massive investments of parking places for everybody. So I think that's a thing of the past that we're going to see. And if anything is going to drive us to the multimodal future, it's removing the requirement for developers to put in minimum amount of parking, per structure. And we're seeing that it's being rolled back everywhere. So I think that's really good.
How did parking requirements start? It just seemed like it was a political land grab, in my opinion, but what was the real true rationale behind it?
I don't know. You have to ask Professor Shoup in Los Angeles, who's a world expert on that. I think that's changing now. I mean, I think urban planners and politicians were moving away from that. Even in Los Angeles, which was one of the last bastion of, parking is the parking place is sort of God-given right. It's not anymore, by the way. It's almost a Second Amendment issue in California, of course.
But having lived there for many years, it's expensive to park. Everywhere you go to CVS or Target, you have to pay to park. It's not like it's free to park. Everywhere you go, you got to pay.
No, it's still pretty free. Oh, come on, honestly. I don't pay in CVS or Whole Foods. And it's easy to, for New York, it's really still so easy. That's almost one of the charms of LA. It's what makes life so easy there. When they work freeways are great and parking is great and sort of drive in this, drive in that is wonderful. But the fact is, we have too many cars. We've got to get people out of cars somehow.
Not going to happen. The debate around getting people out of cars, I'll take the opposite side of that. Individuals are not going to get out of their cars because they like their convenience. They like keeping their stuff in there. And the automakers need to keep printing money to pay their dividends for shareholders. Well, I get that in theory. I don't see the car going away anytime soon.
No, it's not going to happen soon. But I think there are going to be changes. I'm a great believer, for example. I think what we're going to see are a lot of new form factors of cars. So I think it's almost every week I see a new company coming out with a 2 or 3 wheeler, 1 or 2 seater electric car. So these sort of light vehicles. And I think you can park them anywhere. Some of them you can even take on a freeway. But I think for urban mobility, it's a great way to get around. I mean, it's insane to live in a city like Los Angeles, where I live, and have like an SUV and you take it 4 blocks to buy some milk, which is what people do now. For example, why not take an electric bike? Electric bikes, a good sturdy electric bike, is a great car substitute in a city like Los Angeles. I have one. I wouldn't dream of taking my car to go to Whole Foods sort of 10 blocks away to buy some grocery, to buy not like a week's worth of grocery, but 20 pounds of groceries easily goes on my bike. Why would I take my car to do that?
It's safe. It's very safe to take a large SUV. You're protected, and that's one of the reasons why you pay a premium for an SUV is for the safety ratings.
Well, look, I mean, I think we can get started in a whole other conversation about the American addiction to car obesity. We're a real outlier on that. I mean, if you look at a lot of the real innovation that's going on in the automobile industry, it's coming out of India and China, sort of micro EVs. And I think that's going to save the planet. It's not going to be, Rivians and electric pickups and electric SUVs. We need electric vehicles that cost sort of $3,000-$4,000.
I agree with that.
We're not going to see them anytime soon in the United States.
Look at markets outside the United States. I think a lot about the Caribbean. They're very small roads. Why not run all the electric vehicles in the Caribbean? They're small roads. They're smaller populations. It's a really great way to do it. And then you can start to remove the dependence of oil and hopefully clean up the Caribbean Sea before it's too late. I think that's a really interesting opportunity to run smaller electric vehicles, is because the roads are so small.
I mean, look, I think the electric golf cart sort of format is a smart one. It's a great one for cities, a great one for resorts. But I think we need to see more of that. And I think we have to change regulations also, because they're limited to speed, et cetera. We have to rewrite some of those regulations. What's so interesting about this period in our lives and in the lives of our societies is that there's this multiplicity of modes of mobility, of form factors. It's like an explosion. I like to think of it in sort of biological terms. If you go back like 500 million years, all life on Earth was sort of single cell organisms. And something happened about 200 million years ago. It was called the Cambrian Revolution, when life forms exploded. And you had, the beginning of mammals and vertebrates and invertebrates and blah, blah, blah. We're having the same kind of thing in mobility today. So we're having electric flying vehicles, small, light electric vehicles, hydrogen trucks, Hyperloop, maglev. It's such a rich tapestry that's getting richer by the day. If you look at sort of micro-mobility, the whole class of vehicles didn't even exist 5 or 6 years ago. You look at every city, I mean, here in Saudi Arabia, everybody's going around on scooters, electric scooters. It's wonderful. And so you have this sort of multiplicity of form factors and different methods of conveyance. It's absolutely fascinating.
You bring a diverse group of individuals together for really great debates, and I love debating the individuals that think the car should go away, and they're really fun, respectful debates, which you can't have these days, but at CoMotion LA you can. John, could you talk about CoMotion LA, when it's going to happen, and if our listeners are interested, how they can register to attend?
Yeah, so CoMotionLA.com. It takes place November 16th through 18th. A few thousand people in the heart of downtown LA. think what's interesting about CoMotion LA, it's about innovation, but it's also about private and public sector collaboration. So we skew about half private sector, so innovators, startups, but also big mobility companies, but a lot of public sector. We see that the future really belongs to robust public-private collaboration. It's also very international, so we have companies and innovators from Europe, from Asia, from Canada. So it's going to be a lot of fun. CoMotion Miami is every April, so it's a mid-April. That's a fun one. It's in the Arts District of Miami in Wynwood. Yeah, it is a lot of fun. We have prototypes of electric planes and drones and all sorts of things. But there's a lot of discussion on policy and how we have to change regulations to kind of incentivize innovation.
I'm looking forward to it. You always do a great job with it. And the conversations are always fun.
Thanks, Grayson. You've always been part of them, and we really love that.
John, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation where we went from NEOM to Miami to New York City to LA, we went all over the map, all around the globe. Can't forget, we went to Dubai as well. What would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Look, I think have an open mind, keep innovating, think about getting rid of your internal combustion engine car and either buy electric or hydrogen or some shared mobility use. But again, I think the future is choice. Consumers should have choice. I think that's what we're seeing now. So there's a lot of choice. If you dial back 10 years, nobody had choice. You had to have a car, or you went in the subway, or I guess a taxi. And now there's just so many choices in the way we get around. So the key will be making sure there's sort of interoperability, seamlessness, and you enjoy it, that it doesn't become a burden to get from point A to point B. It becomes sort of a fun journey, and you don't have to be stressed about it. You can go out of your house with a smile in the morning to go somewhere. And that's what we have to see.
John, smiles are awesome because the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future is consumer choice for mobility. Thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thanks, Grayson. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.